All right, welcome to another week in review. We are reviewing the week of July 23rd to the 29th, 2017. Now, there's going to be a lot of holes here. There was a bunch of information about Debbie Wasserman Schultz's aide fleeing to Pakistan. There was some smashed hard drives, but we'll try to focus on the top 20 stories of the week. All right, story number 54 comes from the Washington Free Beacon. And just as a side note, why is this story number 54 instead of story number 1? Well, I'll show you. The reason is if you're listening and you don't have the link handy, you can just go to www.radioinfoside.com/links/54 and boom, it'll take you right to the story. So basically all you have to remember is link 54 and the little bit in front of it. So makes it easy if you're listening. Anyway, what is the story? Priebus on resignation. Trump wanted to go in a different direction. The big story is the chief of staff, Priebus here, resigned. And I think this is a big story, supposedly because Trump wanted to go a different direction, and I actually believe that that is true. Now let's talk about that for a minute because I think that's important. Basically what happened is recently there's been the whole healthcare debate trying to get Congress to pass healthcare, and they just won't. They won't repeal Obamacare, and they can't seem to get their act together enough to come up with Trump care. And as a side note, Trump actually isn't architecting these plans. He's telling Congress to do something, and they just can't. And an interesting tidbit of information came out. Eric Cantor says if you've got anger working for you, you're going to let it be. Basically, the whole Republican effort to repeal Obamacare that failed by a couple votes while Obama was in charge was, according to Eric Cantor, all a scam, because basically what it was is it was just posturing to get points with the base. But the deep state, the powers that be, had no real intention of removing or replacing Obamacare. And I should have linked this, but I didn't. But it's from the Washingtonian. If you want to take a look, just Google Cantor, anger working for you. And yeah, they had no intention of repealing it. It was just posturing. And again, this is all vote gaming. These guys, you've got Paul Ryan, McConnell, they all do vote counting, and they'll swap votes. If they know a vote's going to come short, they have no problem with having people grandstand and posture for something that they know won't pass. And they keep careful track of everything, so people like Eric Cantor can be all angry, even though he got ousted by a libertarian candidate who was a Republican, but just more on the libertarian side, an unknown. Basically, he can know that something's going to fail, like they don't have the votes to repeal Obamacare, so that allows good old Eric here and his buddies to posture against it. But when they could have the votes, like now, they decide no, they won't change Obamacare. And as Trump, said a couple times that this 60 2/3 majority or 60 member majority that currently is in place in order to get things repealed and certain things passed in the Senate needs to be tweaked. It's procedural. It's not put there by the Constitution. If the Democrats were in power, they'd fully go back to a simple majority. But these guys, Eric Cantor, again, he's ousted, but you've got Paul Ryan and co. and McConnell. They could repeal, they could get rid of that rule and go back to a simple majority, and Obamacare could be replaced. But they don't want that. And part of the whole drain the swamp here is basically Trump was trying to work with the Republican Party. Priebus was a bridge between the GOP and the Trumplicans, let's call them. And basically, all the workings with the GOP, the rhinos, the GOPE, whatever you want to call them, the establishment, the deep state part of the party, failed. And Priebus was there to be a kind of go-between between Trump and the GOPE. Well, now, and what that means is Grand Old Party, Republicans, establishment. So now this indicates to me that Trump is seeing that working with the GOP is worthless. So now Priebus is out. We've got a general coming in, General Kelly, who Trump seems to trust. He's going to take over, and basically it's going to be a much more militaristic, I think, war politically, internally, and it doesn't also help to have a general staff guy who's a four-star Marine, former four-star Marine general, in case war breaks out with North Korea as well, or some other place. But this signals a change. Trump isn't going to try to work through or work with these guys. He's going to try to work through them. Now, Priebus was also accused of either he directly or his staff being a continual source of leaks. Supposedly, I've heard a rumor that Priebus even tried to have Trump drop out of the race or drop out of the presidency because of this whole fake dossier thing. And but those aren't confirmed. So taking it on face value that Priebus is a decent guy, he may not be, but I can't say anything otherwise. I mean, he gave a pretty decent reconciliation speech, which you can watch here if you wish. Giving CNN an interview after he resigned or was resigned, depending on how you want to look at it. But it definitely signals that the way things are going forward is going to change, and I think those changes will be dramatic. And who else is in the crosshair? None other than the Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Now, Jeff Sessions supposedly was he was. There's no supposedly about it. He supported Trump in the beginning, but recused himself from not only investigating Hillary Clinton before he was selected as the Attorney General. He said that he wouldn't do that, or any of the Democratic corruption. He's basically done nothing on that. He, by going around to South America, going after MS-13, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But what it does is it just gets him on this thing of doing a bunch of other stuff than dealing with the constitutional crisis that's brewing, and that's Mueller's witch hunt. Mueller seems to be, under Jeff Sessions, having an almost unlimited budget. He's going out and hiring lawyers. Mueller's firm, even though supposedly I think Mueller was supposed to be a Republican, as Newt Gingrich pointed out, something like over 95% of all its political donations that can be tracked went to Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. Most of the lawyers that are being hired to investigate Trump are all Hillary Clinton operatives or DNC operatives. And Jeff here, Mr. Recusal, is just letting them go, giving them a budget. We see that Mueller's expanded the investigation beyond just Russia collusion with the election and starting to go through a bunch of other Trump files, Trump business dealings. And it really looks like a witch hunt. A lot of the left wants to make this appear like a Watergate scandal, but how long has Mueller had? He's had months, and I guarantee you most of the media outlets out there have had 25 plus people, staffs, working on trying to dig up stuff on Trump. And so far, it's a big nothing burger. And good old self-righteous Jeff here, Mr. Recusal, is allowing all this stuff to continue. And Trump rightly tweeted, if he would have known this was going to go on, he wouldn't have had Sessions as his attorney general. And I think this is all facilitating a deep state soft coup against Trump. A lot of people have commented on that. But him, by just prancing around, doing a bunch of other stuff, taking credit for things that maybe he really has nothing to do with, like border immigration issues that were all Trump initiated, he allows this Mueller witch hunt and the deep state to continue to go after Trump. So I'm not sold on Jeff here being part of the good guys. He appears to be, but he's really being disappointed. Perhaps I'm reading him wrong. I hope he proves me wrong, but I think Sessions is on his way out. Here's a possible other deep state rat that might have to go. Boom, report McMaster caught privately communicating White House internal politics to deep state acting FBI Director McCabe. And it's not the first time McMaster has leaked, so I would look for him to go as well. Link 55, going along with the deep state war against Trump theme. Former CIA director calls for a coup if Trump fires Mueller. Now, this is a bit sensationalistic. He didn't actually say coup, although the technical definition is coup. By the way, this is from Blacklisted News. The actual source of the article is Zero Hedge, so let's go there. Basically what he said is that if Trump fires Mueller, then government officials should quit taking orders from Trump. The executive branch would quit taking orders from Trump, which is the definition of a coup. Though most of the time when we talk about coups, we're expecting military in the streets type of stuff. But it just goes to show that Trump's political adversaries, even though the American people are generally fully with Trump, at least I don't think his voter base that got him there has eroded too much, if at all. If it might have even increased. But the constant elite attacks against Trump are growing. Here's just another one. And so yeah, pray for Trump. Pray for our country, because we could see some very interesting Banana Republic type stuff go on depending on how things play out. And link 56 comes from Daily Caller, going along the deep state theme again. Fight for the Future, a radical left-wing group funded with dark money, offers $15K to leftist cells fighting Trump. So it goes on. A progressive nonprofit organization that claims to seek to expand the internet's transformational power for good is offering as much as $15K a month to fund leftist activism against Donald Trump. Prospective members are expected to establish A-teams or cells dedicated to specific issues. And the article goes on. So if you want to make some money going against Trump, I guess here you go. And again, this is more just astroturfing, with a lot of Trump protest or anti-Trump protest have, people have caught buses coming in, Craigslist ads for people to protest, and they fill up these buses with paid protesters, and, the deep state's all into this. So check this article out. And article 57 comes from Breitbart. Cheap labor lobby gears up to capture DHS from John Kelly. So as Kelly leaves the Department of Homeland Security and goes to be the head of Trump's staff, it's talking about how, again, the GOPE, the establishment wing of the party, is going to try to get a bunch of, or someone who's into weak immigration enforcement, free trade, all of that, so that big corporations that exploit third world labor both abroad and the ones they import allow to be imported in by weak border security. They're going to try to get one of their own people into the head of the DHS position that Kelly's vacating. So again, the deep state's war on the American people and Trump continues. And I do apologize about starting off very political here. I try to find articles that are generally kind of neutral politically, just stuff that needs to be brought to attention. That doesn't matter if you're left or right, but things are popping here, so I think it's worth noting. Link 58 comes from Real Clear Defense. It's actually sourced from another place, which is the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and it's China's weaponization of trade. Again, how China uses trade, and China is not the only country that does this. America does it a little bit. Other countries, Europe, does it. And the gist of it is China's government has encouraged and then exploited other states' economic reliance on it to compel their support for its foreign policy objectives. And it goes into examples of that, the weaponization of trade, and it's an interesting article. Check it out. The harsh reality is that China is turning into a trade tyrant that rides roughshod over international rules. Its violations include maintaining non-tariff barriers to keep out foreign competition, subsidizing exports, tilting the domestic market in favor of Chinese companies, pirating intellectual property, using antitrust laws to extort concessions, like recently against Apple, and underwriting acquisitions of foreign firms to bring home their technologies. So this is a really good article, and I think, a lot of people worried about a trade war happening between the US and China with Trump being elected. I think that the problem is with that worry is we're already in a trade war. We're just not fighting it. We're seeing billions of dollars of trade imbalances, all sorts of technology going along, just what we read here, being transported to China. And again, they're using their trade capabilities to, even in the US, if you start going against China, you'll have companies like Walmart or big box stores come to the congressman and say, hey, you can't do that because we make billions of dollars off the Chinese trade and we funded your campaign, so stop it. And we got a bunch of business schools that are given billions of dollars by pro-trade groups, and all you hear from non-thinking parroting individuals is free trade's good, free trade's good, free trade's good. It's not always good. And along those lines, Article 59 comes from Real Clear Defense. 9 links in the chain: the weaponized narrative, Sun Tzu, and the essence of war. First part in the article is here that first point, that all war is a conflict of narratives is a premise worth considering. Each side claims to be more powerful or morally better than the other, and military action is both an extension of politics, or von Clausewitz's, a continuation of war. We're always at a state of war. Politics, by other means, an extension of propaganda of the deed. So it goes on. To explain this premise, let us begin with some concepts. First, the concept of threat is greatly understood to be comprised of an intent and capability. War is ostensibly intended to counter perceived threats. So one of the big operations or psychological operations is to conceal your capability and to confuse or deny your intent, which I think China is doing a great job at. And a narrative can now deploy in a rapid-fire series of mutually reinforcing stories that are hard for people to disregard and reach a global audience in seconds at minimal cost. The Russians are great at this. The Chinese are great at this. I mean, all these Democrats are talking about how they're concerned about Russia meddling in with American politics. I'd like to direct them to RT.com, previously known as Russia Today, which is a Russian news source that is continually psyoping the narrative. And all these Johnny-come-lately Democrats have done nothing for that. So anyway, this article goes into some things from The Art of War, Sun Tzu. You should pick up a copy of that. I bet there's something out there on the internet for free. And it talks about the 9 chains here. So this is what we're spending some time on. So let's go over them. Non-kinetic force matters. First link in the chain is talking about owning the moral high ground and making your enemy appear to have less than that, and even sowing discord amongst them. If his forces are united, separate them. And you can do that by sowing a bunch of, like Russia Today. Russia Today is an interesting psyop operation because it doesn't necessarily lie, it just leaves context out. Like if you want to know the sins of the USA, go to Russia Today, go to Sputnik, go to the various other channels, even, Russian money flows into like Veterans Today and other places. If you want to know America's sins, check all those sites out. Not so much if you want to know Russia or China's sins, that's pretty much absent. So American readers who go to these sites, although they're not necessarily being lied to per se, they get the idea that America is really this total bad guy. The truth is a lot different. We're mixed. We have some very good things going for us, and we've also got some sins that we've done and some bad things like internal corruption going for us. But we have to, if you just read Russia Today and you don't understand that the problems in the rest of the world are worse and other countries are doing all sorts of crazy evil stuff that makes us look like saints sometimes, because that's not discussed, you won't like America. You'll think we're the bad guys. I mean, this is a big problem with the left right now, is I think they've been psyoped into thinking that America is evil. America is this mixed bag, and a lot of other countries are way worse. And I'm not saying that to excuse America's sins, but again, it's the total, if his forces are united, separate them. Let's scroll down some more. Weaponized narratives, this would be the second one in the chain, can showcase urgent crisis to distract the public and leaders from more important events. Basically, you use weaponized narratives and accusations and machine gunning issues, talking one issue after another before anything can be answered, to keep your adversary off balance. Again, to distract attention away from other things. And it talks about chaos, fatigue. Chaos and planning creates decision fatigue. So if you constantly are hitting your opponent with a weaponized narrative, you distract them and their decision making can go down. So that's bad. Third talks a little bit about, how with military stuff, you basically count tanks and you can kind of show military power. In information warfare, it's not quite the same. Depending on when you leak a story, it could actually backfire, blow up in your face, or it could, an additional story that's going against your opponent's narrative that challenges it and the people buy it could be way more devastating. Two stories could be huge as opposed and have, a much larger effect chaos-wise and decision-making-wise than just two tanks. So read up on that. What's our fourth here? Fourth would be the idea that basically using chaos and weaponized narratives is better used by the emerging powers rather than the predominant or status quo power. And with these distractions, you can do a bunch of piranha attacks where you're not trying to overwhelm your foe all at once. You're taking small bites and getting a bunch of little gains. We see this both militarily with Russia taking Crimea, taking parts of Georgia. We see that with China militarily in the South China Sea. And we also see it with their attacks against narratives. I would say that I'm not agreeing with the Syrian conflict, but there definitely was a lot of blowback that was fed by Russia and others that got into the alternative media that helped derail what probably should have been derailed. Like, again, I'm not agreeing with the Syrian Arab Spring off that went bad, but definitely there was resistance there, and it was all narrative resistance as well. And the West lost that war. Fifth, it talks about knitting a narrative, I would argue. It's grabbing a bunch of short-term stories or little bits and pieces and constantly weaving them in a narrative that goes against the goodness of the narrative or the strategic desires of your foe. Again, Russia Today constantly hammering on the sins of America is basically a weaving a narrative that America is bad and people are being psyoped to it. So with the hundreds of stories that happen a day, or actually tens of thousands probably, you're picking out as a psyop operative the little nits and or the little nuggets that you can push that will support your narrative and destroy your enemies. 6, is talking about just changing moods and using narrative to get what you want without even fighting or making your enemy's mood and make him sluggish. So when you do fight, you have an asymmetric advantage. We can see this with Russia again, who's constantly threatening its neighbors, have taken pieces of Georgia, have taken Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. And, in the alternative press, I saw an article by Sign of the Times, SOT.net, about how Finland's so scared of this phantom Russia threat. Russia's constantly probing Finland. The alternative media will talk about NATO's massive presence on the, in the Balkans, just, forcing Russia to deploy 3 more divisions there, And they forget that at the end of the Cold War, we had something close to 300,000 troops along the borders with Russia that had nuclear weapons, airplanes, tanks, with the ability to surge probably close to 1 million troops there if a conflict broke out. And now we've got like 30,000 troops because Russia's messing all over the place over there. We send, a couple brigades to Poland and a striker brigade rolling through as kind of an assurance through several Eastern European countries. And they're totally, Russia-dominated alternative media is there to say, oh, NATO's, attacking Russia and standing up all these forces on Russia's border, and Russia, and in the meanwhile, Russia's constantly probing things, looking for the next little piece of land that they can annex. They just moved up 500 meters in Georgia, in one of the provinces there that's in conflict, so they're closer to a key strategic roadway, and they just reposition themselves to be able to take it. And I would expect Russia, especially in the declining state that we're in with them diplomatically, which more of that will come out probably next week. We're going to see them go after more places, I would say. 7th, it talks about a combined arms information warfare strategy, how Russia crowdsourced a bunch of people to debunk the MH17 shootdown, using botnets, using a combination of strategically said things, like you might have Putin come out and say something, and then you're also having a bunch of stories. You've got bots that amplify those stories on various social networks, and then you have your little army of people, sock puppet controllers going out and doing things. You want everything to work together. And 8, talking about how a new idea can take root before it can be debunked. In information warfare, there's no distance. So, again, hitting things fast with a bunch of different stories, letting them travel, and even if they're lies, it's easier to apologize and ask permission, right? Similar concept. Finally, weaponized narrative targets our minds, and we rarely defend our minds well. In fact, because I would argue that leftists are in control of education, and this might be unfair to them, but I'm just going to call it like I see it. They actually have depreciated critical thinking in the schools because they want to teach people what to think rather than how to think. So this has given America and other Western societies a vulnerability to not think critically and to not protect their minds, leaving them ripe for psychological operatives that have access to them through internet channels where before they wouldn't have. So it's a whole new world here. Anyway, read this article for yourself. It's very interesting. It's going through the typical 9 links discussed in Sun Tzu and applying them to a information warfare environment. Very worth the read. Alright, this is Mass Private Tel's blog, and it's on Blogspot, so it's got kind of a dated format, but don't let that throw you because there's still a lot of good stories. Star Wars, and this is link 60, Star Wars movies to use facial recognition to spy on audiences. It talks about Disney research used facial biometrics to spy on 150 movie audiences. And the reason initially why I brought this up is because you think about the surveillance society, you think about government, cameras everywhere, automated systems using artificial intelligence, coalescing license plate readers, social media habits and comments, facial recognition to catch people, just this kind of Orwellian stew. But what a lot of people miss is that there's going to be a lot of private companies that use this surveillance technology to add to the Orwellian stew, and they'll share data with government might share data with them. But initially, this article goes on to talk about how it's tracking audience members, reading their emotions, but it also might start being used by theaters and by Disney and other companies to create a pattern. Is it going to be really Orwellian when you go into a theater and there's cameras there who find you, and then they can coalesce a list of what movies you like, what scenes that you reacted to, and how? Is it going to be like you go to certain movies and then you can show absolutely no emotion so you don't create the wrong data profile? This is just a reminder, it's not all government that's creating this dystopia. It's also Disney. Article 61 comes from New World Notes, and I just thought this was interesting. 6 of the top 10 grossing PC games for June of 2017 are MMOs. And I really do think that, we're getting into this age where virtual reality, augmented reality, game reality are all going to become larger factors in our lives. A little personal note, I actually met my wife on a game called Second Life. Don't play it. It's dated. It's got a lot of sleazy stuff in it, although there's a lot of people who use it to do amazingly creative things as well. But I would put me as like the beginning here of a forerunner where, virtual worlds, we're going to do more and more things in them socially. I mean, I think gaming companies have been a little bit hesitant about having too much social interaction, especially like adult type stuff where you meet people and later on leads to meeting them in real life. But it's going to become a bigger and bigger thing. I think Second Life was one of the early, even before then, just any kind of role-playing game where people would meet up, they could do the little social chat. But I think Second Life was a foretaste of what is coming, and it's going to be like this alternative reality where more and more people just kind of check out of reality in a sense. We go to our little virtual world where we live out our little fantasy existence, and here's Second Life here, and it has ramifications because, here's the more we spend in like a virtual environment, the less our real life skills are developed. Someone sent me an article talking about how the psychologist was watching her child's slumber party, and basically what she observed is all these, preteen or early teen girls, when she was young and had a slumber party, it was all about, whispering, hanging out, staying up too late. But with this new generation coming up, it was all about, they all were on their little phones and they were exhibiting what this psychologist said was autistic behavior. By the way, that was Hello Moxie on Twitter who sent me that. I should bring that up. But I didn't link it, so maybe I'll do that next week. But, we're all getting into our phones, we're getting into watching this video. We're leaving reality behind, and it's going to affect us, just like those little girls were becoming almost autistic in their behavior. It's just an interesting thing where there is good stuff involved in all of this, but there's also potential for a lot of bad as well. Going along the dystopian theme here, Google bows, this is from Jihad Watch, Google bows to Muslim pressure, changes search results to conceal criticism of Islam and jihad. YouTube, also a Google company, is doing kind of the similar thing. And, it's always sold as for good, we're going to stop hate, we're going to stop, people feeling bad, blah, 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 blah. But what they're really doing is stifling intellectual debate. I think the debate about Islam and its various sects, there needs to be a reformation in Islam. I mean, I as a born-again Christian believe Islam is a false hope. I have all sorts of criticisms of Islam, but I am not anti-Muslim. I want Muslims to be freed out of what I'd say is a cult and, be able to pursue a life of their own without being enslaved to a cult, just like other cults. And, if we can't have the intellectual debate on that, because if you Google it, you can't find stuff. If you post something on social media about it that other people might see, it'll be buried. It's basically giving Google the ability to make moral judgments. And they're a private company, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. And here's just more evidence of this, them manipulating search results and nerfing things. Twitter does it, YouTube does it, other social media sites do it. They say it's for your good, but is it really? Article 62, picking up the pace here. First human embryos edited in the U.S. This is from Blacklisted News. It's actually from MIT Technology Review, but basically it's talking about how scientists felt left out because China was doing all this CRISPR gene editing, and now America's doing it. And there is potential for good here. I'm not saying it's all evil, correcting genetic deformities, but again, the continuous theme that I'm always talking about is opening up the Pandora's box of gene manipulation and where it could lead. So, something to keep an eye on. Link 64 comes from healthyclan.com. Half of U.S. citizens have diabetes or are increased risk without being aware of it. I brought this up because I'm going to do a podcast about food security in the New World Order. But this is just a theme here where our diet is just destroying us, and we can get into it, but check this article out. 65 from Blacklisted News, similar theme, sperm counts in the West plunged by 60% in 40 years as modern life damages men's health. Again, this is all diet related. Some of it's activity related. It actually comes from The Independent in the UK. So yeah, I'm going to flush this out in more of a podcast, but again, we're destroying ourselves with our diet, and here's just another indicator of that, so check that out. Article 66 comes from Investors Watch blog. Europe's dwindling Christianity, new shocking figures. We live in this world of change, and here it is, Sputnik. I talk about them being a Russian psyop. But again, this is the truth of what's going on. So I'll be my own psychological operative and steal a story from them so I can create my own narrative here. But yeah, it's just showing that society's changing. Um, we're going to a post-Christian world. For me as a Christian, I think is all bad. And one of the dystopian Orwellian things that will happen is we will try to bury the fact that we were even Christian. And that's where Article 67 comes in. I mean, I'm not saying this country was a Christian country, but it was heavily influenced by the Judeo-Christian ethic. And here, this is like doing forensic archaeology, but with writing. This is an excellent article from Castilia House talking about identifying post-Christian storytelling. Actually, the article's more identifying Christian storytelling in a post-Christian era. And it's interesting how much of our science fiction and everything, 40 or 50 years ago, all had kind of these Christian themes. And he's using this John Wayne movie here to kind of play on that, where now things aren't. And current people here, the social justice warriors, the younger generations, look at these stories. Literature is all outdated, and at something from a bygone era, if they even look at it at all. And he's just saying, the reason why you don't get it is because all these stories were written for people that no longer exist. A Christian society that is rapidly fading into history. So it's interesting. Check the article out. All right, 68, another blacklisted news article. The toxic fruit of financialization. Risk is for those at the bottom. Financialization is basically how everything's becoming monetized. And we see the ownership society, how more and more of the wealthiest 1%, I would argue it's actually the wealthiest 0.01% that is the problem. Just wealth disparity, some risk, this pyramid. Like, is it really good for society to have a wealth distribution pyramid like this? And please note, I'm not a communist. I like capitalism because it's the freest system. But when it gets into crony capitalism and this 1% uses non-market forces to protect their status against the rest of us, it's a brew for disaster going forward. Article 69 comes from Trusted Financial News, and it's talking about student loan tsunami on the horizon of $847 billion in direct loan programs. Only $535 billion is actually being paid back. So, check this out on your own. It's an issue. And it's actually linked to mybudget360.com has the full article. So, oops. Yes, check it out. I was just seeing if you're awake or not. Article 7 comes from Hedge Accordingly. There's an unbelievable $800 billion backlog of highway and bridge projects across the USA. Just talking about infrastructure and everything that we need to pay for it. And I don't think that's going to happen. So we're going to see the United States, a lot of our infrastructure head towards second rate or third tier, which is sad. And it also, Trump initially wanted to come in and tackle this first. But again, dealing with the GOP, he didn't. He put some of their priorities first. So now that that's changing, maybe this will change as well. 71 comes from eagnews.org. Minnesota test results show school-issued computers, iPad not improving student learning. I thought this was just a good article to touch on briefly, because it shows, a lot of debate about education is always throwing more money at the problem or throwing more resources. And that doesn't necessarily equate to a better education, and this proves that. So something to keep in mind. Actually, system analysis to why kids aren't learning and testing and coming up with a plan rather than going with just the solution of the day according to, Joe Blow out there. Oh, we'll just give everybody iPads and they'll learn. Doesn't work that way. All right, 72 comes from the Event Chronicle. Newly declassified memos detail extent of improper Obama-era NSA spying. And the reason I included this one is it's total scandal fatigue. Like, I read this and I barely even blinked. It's like there's just so much corruption, so many laws being broken, especially with Big Brother watching you, that now even reporting on it seems kind of meaningless. We hear about it, we just go, oh yeah, they're doing that, oh well. No, we need to keep our outrage and say that everybody's got to abide by the law. Poor people, rich people, government people, non-government people, corporate people, small business people. There's a law of the land and everyone's got to abide by it. And with the amount of corruption under the Obama administration and just Washington in general, we're just so used to seeing it that we don't even really bat an eye. But anyway, if you want to hear the latest scandal, if you're not scandal-sided or scandal fatigued, here's another NSA doing, Obama using the NSA for political unmasking of opponents, and you can read more about it here. Article 73 comes from Novanight.com, a Bulgarian news source that I track. I actually like it. U.S. Congress has voted new sanctions against Russia and Iran. Obviously, I could have picked other sources for this. I put this here because this is going to kick off if Trump doesn't veto this. I'm not saying he should. I'm just saying if he doesn't, this is going to kick off the end, in my opinion, of any chances of a detente type thing with Russia. Russia already is responding to this by saying the number of diplomats that the U.S. can operate in Russia is going to be cut down by something like 755 of them are going to be asked to leave. It's going to make dealing with Russia more difficult. Again, I don't know what the answer is, but this is worth noting, especially next week. I bet we're going to see a lot more fallout from this. And just a side note, I'm often finding myself in this weird niche on the internet concerning Russia. I think Russia pursues its own interest. I think they have excellent intelligence capabilities, PSYOP capabilities, and they use them. I call them out on it. I don't like the fact that they're biting pieces of their former empire back. If Eastern Europe said we want to be part of Russia or want to be part of a Russian Federation and it was done democratically, I'd have no problem with it. But these countries don't want that. And for Russia to go in and enforce its will there, I think is wrong. And I think it's wrong when the U.S. does stuff like that. But I also don't think Russia's the source of all evil either. Or the Democrat, well, I won't get into it. It seems like on the internet, the whole binary thinking thing, either Putin's the savior of Christianity and fighting against the New World Order and the greatest thing since sliced bread, or he's the flow of all evil. I think he's kind of in between there. So just a side note. All right, last one. I need to bring in some clapping sound effects here. Thanks for hanging with me through this week. This one comes from Christianity Today, or Semi-Christian Today. U.S. churches are known for feeding the poor and hungry, but most good deeds go unnoticed. A lot of my stories are pretty down, so I wanted to include this article just to show that there is a lot of good going on. There's still a lot of Christians and out doing good things in the world, non-Christians as well. And they don't necessarily get credit for it. It doesn't grab the headlines, but there's still people doing good. Still good things are happening. I read a article about a new 3D printed heart that looks really promising for heart patients. So I don't want you to get the idea that the world's totally lost. There's still people out there doing good. I encourage you to do good as well. And, I had more to say. You might have noticed me picking the pace up here. We're going pretty long. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there. Just like to say thanks for listening, and hopefully I'll gain a little bit of traction here with people watching the videos, and as they do, I'll invest more time in editing them and putting sound effects and maybe planning out what I'm going to say a little bit more. But I enjoy doing them, so at least at this level, I'll keep doing them, and hopefully, if things pick up, I'll invest more in making them a little more polished. Anyway, if you'd like to reach me with tips, comments, whatever, here are 3 primary ways of reaching me. Email, radioinfoside@gmail.com. I don't check that often, so there might be a delay. Probably the best way to reach me is through Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, @Infoside, once again, INFOCYDE. On YouTube, my channel is Infoside 2010. I'm also on Facebook. Just do a search on Infoside and hopefully my page will come up. Or on the web, I have a custom website that's actually kind of cruddy, that I'm working on it when I can. It is radioinfoside.com, and I do have a bunch of links there in the news where I gather the stories that are going to appear on there. It's updated a couple times a day, so it's worth checking out. Thanks again for watching, and I hope next week we see some more good things happening.